At first glance, it looked like an ordinary summer morning until I saw Karen Vosberg, the freshly re-elected HOA president, perched on my cedar deck with a fishing rod as if she owned the lake and everything on it. When I pointed to the private property sign nailed to the dock post, she didn't blink. Instead, she smirked, pulled out her phone, and called the cops on me. What she didn't know was that just a few feet away, sunlight was glinting off a gold-embossed permit in my cabin window, proof that the deck she was trespassing on was about to become the stage for her biggest mistake. I was halfway up the gravel path from the road, enjoying the loose rhythm of my stride, when the sound of a reel clicking broke through the cicada buzz. There she was, Marlene Vosberg, the HOA president herself, planted in one of those folding camp chairs right on my cedar deck. A graphite fishing rod arched in her hands like she was working a prize catch. Her khaki fishing vest looked freshly pressed. The soles of her sneakers were spotless, as if she'd stepped straight from her SUV onto my boards. Two men in pastel polos loitered down on the shore, their heads bent toward their phones, though every so often I caught the telltale angle of a camera lens. I took the last few steps onto the deck, the boards flexing under my weight. "Afternoon. Marlene," I said, keeping my voice easy. "You know this is private property." She didn't even glance up from the line trailing into the green water. "Lake belongs to the community, Malcolm," she replied. "That means I can fish anywhere along it." I tipped my chin toward the sign bolted to the dock post, a weathered cedar plank with private property burned into the grain. She gave it the briefest look, lips curving into something between a smile and a dare. Without a word, she dug a phone from her vest, tapped the screen, and said into it, "Yes, I'm at the North Shore dock. We've got a hostile homeowner situation." Her tone was syrupy, the kind meant to sound calm while planting alarm. I let the silence hang for a moment, then stepped past her into the cabin. The afternoon sun slanted through the big window, catching on the glass frame that hung above my desk. The gold-embossed seal of my state-issued dock permit glimmered for an instant before the light shifted. I let my gaze rest on it, the paper crisp and clean inside its frame. It would have made the point then and there, but I decided to leave it where it was. By the time I stepped back out, a county sheriff's cruiser had rolled up to the edge of the property. He climbed out slowly, eyes moving from me to Marlene, then down to the sign on the dock post. One eyebrow lifted. "This is a civil matter," he said, voice flat, as if the decision had been made before he opened the car door. Marlene adjusted her rod, muttering just loud enough for me to catch, "We'll handle it through the HOA." I scanned the shoreline as the cruiser idled. That's when I saw him, Brent, my old fishing buddy, standing a little apart from the others. A phone was in his hand, the camera pointed straight at us. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just kept recording the lens fixed like an unblinking eye. Somewhere under my ribs, a knot tightened. The email landed at 7:03 a.m., a crisp ping that cut through the hum of my old fridge and the drip of the coffee maker. Subject violation. Notice unauthorized structure usage. No salutation, just a block of boilerplate declaring my dock and deck available for community access under a clause I'd never seen in any covenant. I read it twice, then a third time, feeling the heat of the mug in my hand more than the heat of any anger. Outside, a dragonfly ticked against the window screen. From somewhere over the water came the moth-like buzz of a drone. I stepped to the back door and watched it drift along the shoreline, a dark comma in the bright morning. The lens flashed once like a wink and moved on toward the next property. I set the laptop on my maple desk and hit call. Ivy's face came up a moment later, hair pulled into a quick knot. Headset crooked at an angle she never noticed until I pointed it out. "Morning, Dad," she said, then squinted at the forwarded notice on her screen. "Who writes this stuff? Unauthorized structure usage of your structure?" "They're trying a new angle," I said. "Let's keep it boring and thorough," she replied, voice wrapping itself in the calm she'd learned working late filings. "Pull deed, purchase records, the original dock permit, any HOA newsletters mentioning access rules. I'll scrub the CCRs for the exact language. On it." I set the mug atop a coaster I never remember to use and woke the printer. The first sheet rattled out warm and ink-scented. I dug into the file drawer, the metal handle cool under my fingers, and pulled a folder labeled Property Lake. Deed, closing disclosures, county tax statements clipped by year. The dock permit was already framed on the wall, my small boast, so I printed a clean copy from its scanned file and slid it into a clear sleeve. When I looked up, Ivy was reading aloud the way she did as a kid when she wanted both of us to carry the same thought at once. "Failure to comply may result in fines and enforcement action," she recited, frowning. "They're treating a dock like a park bench. Do we have photos of the sign on your post? From last year, I said. I'll get fresh ones. Good. And Dad. She leaned closer to the camera. Don't talk to them without me or a recorder running. I gave her the old scout salute. On the desk, a cream envelope had slid partly under the printer my latest 401k statement pages curled just enough to catch a shadow. The top line had a number I didn't like to think about too long. It did its part simply by existing proof that time had been passing while I split kindling and counted trout. I put it back on the stack, just visible enough to remind me what steadiness looked like. By mid-morning, the drone was back looping slow ovals above the water like a bored gull. I took my tool bucket outside and mounted 2 additional trail cameras, one on the pine facing the path to the dock, another under the eave where the deck met the stairs. The first screw bit into wood with that satisfying squeal. Sap perfumed the air. I tested the angles on my phone, a grid of live thumbnails showing the planks, the shoreline, the sign on the post. The wind teased the edge of the sign and it clacked against the bolt head, a small wooden heartbeat. Around noon, Ivy pinged me a checklist and went back to her caseload in Spokane. I ate a sandwich over the sink to avoid crumbs and watched the drone settle somewhere near the HOA clubhouse on the far bank. The lake took the sun like polished stone. At 2:30, the alert dinged. Motion detected dock east view. I tapped the notification. The first still was the deck empty. The second caught the bow of a skiff nosing into frame. 3 figures stepped out gray polos, matching caps. One carried a sledge with almost ceremonial care, another held a post hole digger, the third balanced a rolled plastic sign under his arm. I switched to live view, but the signal hiccuped, then steadied. The men moved with professional casualness, the kind people wear when they think their authority is beyond question. They paced my boundary, talking, pointing at the post where my private property plaque hung. A gull barked. The lake shushed against the rocks. The camera under the eave caught a better angle. I saved a clip and then pulled the SD card to load on my laptop habit from years of audits wanting the file in my own hands, not just in a cloud I didn't control. In the cabin, the room felt cooler than outside. Pine shadows lay across the floorboards. I slid the card in and opened the sequence frame by frame. First frame, a gray polo crouched measuring tape tongue, glinting his hat shadowing his face. Second frame, the rolled sign unfurls, white plastic bouncing in the sun. Third frame, the post hole digger bites into soil that has known boot heels and summer chairs and nothing else. They set the new sign, Community Access, against my boundary just inches from my anchored post. The words were all caps, cheerful in the way of warnings that want to be your friend. Ivy called back just as I started a folder labeled HOA July. Send me high res, she said. I'll embed the timestamps. Also, I found a newsletter blurb from 2019 pushing for expanded shoreline enjoyment. No one voted on it. I sent the files. While they uploaded, I tapped through the sequence again, magnifying to 200% the pixels, softening around edges. A fourth figure entered the frame, the camera catching him mostly in profile as he steadied the post with both hands while the others tamped soil around it. The brim of his cap hid his eyes, but I didn't need to see them. I knew the slope of that shoulder, the way his elbows flared when he lifted anything heavier than a cooler. Zoom in, Ivy, said, hearing the change in my breathing. I did, bringing his face into a wash of digital grain. The still sharpened the longer I stared at it, my mind filling the blanks that pixels couldn't. Brent, my old fishing buddy, the man who taught me how to flick a fly line so it fell like a hair. He braced the post jaw, set attention down and away. The overlay stamped the moment to the second. I sat back. The office air smelled of warm ink and pine pitch and something else like the inside of a church when the door is cracked on a hot day. Far off, the drone's whine swelled and faded. You okay? Ivy asked. I'm fine, I said, and heard how even I made it. Send me that CCR language. I'll print the lot. We hung up with the small practical tenderness we've learned to use instead of big speeches. I punched holes in the deed copy, and the permit slid them into a new binder with labeled tabs. Deed, permit photos, CCR, excerpts, correspondence. The 401k statement lay beside it like a quiet witness. I added a tab for miscellaneous because there is always something you forget you'll need. The phone vibrated on the desk and skittered a half-inch. A text from an unknown number lit the screen, though it wasn't unknown at all once I read it. Don't fight this, Malcolm. It'll get worse. Brent. The Pine and Perch sat on a low rise above the marina, its windows smudged with salt spray and finger streaks from 100 kids pointing at boats. Inside, the air was a comfortable tangle of brewed coffee and fryer oil. Somewhere in back, a cook dropped a basket of trout, and the sizzle filled the room like rain on tin. Cyrus P. Alden lifted himself into the corner booth across from me and set a small leather case on the table, the way a clockmaker might set down tools. "Let me see it," he said. I slid my phone over. He wiped the screen with the cuff of his flannel and pinched to zoom until the photograph of my dock permit filled the glass. Then he flipped open the case and drew out a magnifying loupe chrome rim dulled from years of pockets and field kits. He held the loupe to his eye, bent over the image, and breathed slowly through his nose. The waitress drifted by with a coffee pot and paused just long enough to hear the word HOA before topping off my cup. "Embossing looks right," Cyrus murmured. "See that halo around the seal? Cheap replicas flatten the fibers. This has lift. And the microprint in the border, there's a hairline pattern you don't see unless you know it's there." He tapped the screen twice and sat back, letting the loupe dangle from its little chain. "If this is the real one, they've got nothing." "If" is doing a lot of work, I said, which is why we verify, not assume. I set my phone on the Formica and hit speaker. "You're live, kiddo." "Morning." Mr. Alden Ivy said, her voice crisp through the tinny speaker. "I'm in between filings, but I can spare a few minutes. Dad sent me the photo and the deed. I'm pulling the permit record from the county archive." Cyrus grunted a hello. He reached for my napkin and drew a quick rectangle with his thumbnail marking the corners. "Watermark sits here offset. Paper is clay-coated. It reflects differently under raking light." He angled my phone toward the window. A winter photograph on the cafe wall mirrored back a lake, frozen stiff men in heavy coats drilling through ice that hasn't visited our shore in years. My email chimed. "Hold," Ivy said. "I'm sending you something first, the bank e-statement I found for the Lake Conservation Fund. Public nonprofits have to post quarterly summaries. Someone forgot to scrub the detail view. Check the line items in March, June, September." I opened the attachment. The PDF loaded slow enough for my pulse to keep time with the progress bar. Columns settled into focus date, vendor memo amount. 3 entries jumped like a rash. 0318, Wellington Resource Partners Consulting, $9, $800, 0622, Wellington Resource Partners Consulting, $9. $800, 0919, Wellington Resource Partners Consulting, $9 to $800, same vendor, same memo, same neat round number, the kind accountants circle before they ask uncomfortable questions. Cyrus leaned in until his shoulder brushed mine. "Wellington," he said softly, tasting the name. "They did consulting for a watershed district up north. Turned out to be a shell. Money went in and came back out with a haircut. You're sure it's the same outfit? I'm sure the pattern rhymes." The waitress returned with a plate that wasn't ours and slid it onto the wrong table. Her eyes flicked to the PDF, to the numbers, and back to me. "You gentlemen need anything else?" she asked, the way people do when they want to hear the answer but don't want to show they want to hear it. "We're fine, thanks," I said. Ivy cleared her throat. "County shows the permit issued to you in 2016. There's a scanned copy attached, and a second scan from 2019 flagged amended. That's odd. Docs don't get amended unless they move or change class. They didn't," I said. "Boards replaced, yes. Footprint, no. Uploading both to your drive," she said. "Dad, I want you to print the original and keep it with the deed. Mr. Alden, if I send you the metadata from the county scan, can you tell if it was altered upstream?" "Maybe," Cyrus said. "Depends on how sloppy they were and whether the clerk's office kept the audit trail. But if Wellington's in the soup, this isn't just about a dock. It's about cash flow and cover." A couple at the next booth went quiet. I stared at the 3 neat $9.800s until they blurred. Numbers can look honest when they march in line. It's their sameness that betrays them. Cyrus tapped my phone again, returning to the permit photo. "Chain of custody." "Malcolm, we need to establish that your original never left your control. The framed one in your cabin, was it ever taken down for copying?" "Not since I hung it," I said. "I have a scan I made the week I got it. Dated, time-stamped." "Good. Keep all versions. We'll print the oldest scan on archival paper so a judge can feel the fibers if it comes to that." He slid the loupe away and folded his hands. Sunlight fell in a thin river across his knuckles, mapping wrinkles into tributaries. Ivy's keyboard clicked through the speaker. "I've bookmarked the Conservation Fund page, but if Wellington scrubs, we'll need screenshots." "Dad, do you still have that screen capture tool I installed?" "I do." "Use it. Get the totals by quarter and the memo field. If the HOA president tries to bury this, we'll already have a record." Cyrus nodded. If the fun's dirty, the permit's just the beginning. He said it softly, but the sentence sat heavy between the sugar caddy and the napkin holder. The cafe's door chimed. A blast of light wolfed across the tile and then settled back into the usual mid-morning haze. Outside, the marina clinked with hardware and halyards. Inside, the coffee tasted a shade more bitter than it had 10 minutes ago. We wrapped the call. Ivy promised to send me county links and a short list of statutes I could quote without sounding like a crank. Cyrus paid for both coffees before I could reach my wallet. He had the slow, stubborn grace of a man who still believes in picking up tabs and returning calls. As he stood, my phone vibrated again. No subject line, no sender name. I recognized. The message was one sentence, plain as a nail: check the conservation fund. You'll see why they want that deck. The sunlight was leaning low through the pines when Ivy's face flickered onto my laptop screen, the split view showing two nearly identical documents. On the left, my dock permit, the one I'd framed in 2016, gold seal crisp signature in blue ink curling at the bottom. On the right, its ghost, a scanned copy stripped of the signature date pushed back to 2018, the seal replaced by a muddy circle that looked more like a coffee ring than state embossing. Cyrus sat across from me, leaning forward on his elbows, eyes narrowing. See this border? He traced a finger just above the laptop glass. On the real one, there's a watermark in the fibers. Tilt it under light and you'll catch the wave pattern. On this copy flat, as newsprint. Someone didn't just misfile, they recreated. Ivy zoomed in on her side. Metadata confirms it. This file wasn't scanned at the county. It came from an IP address inside the HOA office. She read the numbers aloud, crisp as a courtroom transcript. That's a unique workstation ID. No mistaking it. The coffee table between us was crowded with manila folders, my deed, a printed county archive receipt, the latest HOA newsletter. The open window let in the muffled clank of tools. Out in the yard, two men in fluorescent vests fussed with the post where my private property sign had stood since spring. One held the bolts in his palm like coins. The other stacked the sign against their cart. They're removing it, I said. Document everything, Ivy replied. I reached for my phone, snapping a picture through the glass. That's when the taller man in the vest face, half hidden by mirrored sunglasses, stepped toward the cabin. He leaned into the doorway with a casual shove as if testing its swing, and his shoulder clipped the wall. The framed permit hanging there rattled once, twice, then came down face first onto the pine floor. The crack of glass was small but sharp like ice, splitting in a warm drink. I was across the room in 2 strides. The frame lay skewed, the gold seal glinting under shards that fanned across the floorboards. I crouched, lifting it by the edges. The glass had fractured in a spider-leg crack radiating from the lower right corner, catching the printed date in a prism of lines. A sliver of my own reflection looked back at me from that broken pane. I brushed off the largest pieces, left the rest where they were, and set the frame back upright on the table glass, gone paper still steady. From the laptop, Ivy's voice tightened. Dad, that's evidence. Don't let anyone near it. Cyrus nodded slowly. Now, it's not just civil, he said. It's criminal. Outside, the crew climbed into their cart, the sign wedged at an angle. The lake lay flat beyond them, sun throwing 1,000 shards across its surface. Somewhere beyond the cove, a low, mechanical rumble started up, deep, deliberate, getting closer. I stepped to the window. Through the pines, a white skiff nosed into view, HOA emblem stenciled in navy along its side. The engine's growl rolled through the floorboards, steady as a threat. The morning began with the smell of coffee and the faint hiss of my kettle steam curling like the lake fog outside. I'd set my mug on the counter beside last night's cedar plank marinade recipe, a little ritual I'd planned for lunch, trout sizzling in quiet defiance of all this HOA nonsense. Then the whine of a power drill cut through the stillness sharp enough to make the window pane hum. I moved to the sliding door, coffee in hand, and saw them 3 men in gray polos with the HOA crest stitched over the heart crouched on my deck like they were gutting a fish. One pried at a cedar board with a crowbar. Another was on his knees with a drill, the bit biting into my screws. My phone buzzed, camera alert. The live feed showed the same scene from above, timestamp burning in the corner. I hit record and stepped outside, boots landing heavier than usual on the planks. Morning, I said the word wrapped in cold air. You boys lost. The one with mirrored sunglasses didn't look up. Orders from the board, he muttered. Gravel crunched in the driveway. Cyrus emerged from his pickup with a notepad in one hand, a small camera in the other. He didn't hurry. He just angled himself to frame the men against the fog-shrouded lake. Under Idaho Code Section 18 to 7008, He read, voice steady. Any person who willfully and maliciously injures or destroys any real or personal property belonging to another is guilty of a misdemeanor. He lowered the pad and clicked the camera. That's you right now. One of the workers froze mid-pry. The man with the drill straightened, and the third, tall, narrow-faced, fumbled a brand-new community access sign leaning against the rail. It toppled with a hollow clang, landing face down in a smear of dew. I walked the perimeter of the deck, photographing every tool, every half-removed screw, every footprint on the damp boards. The camera chirped with each shot, each one neatly time-stamped. I even bent to photograph the fallen sign, its edge beaded with water, as if it had been waiting for the right audience to see it. Private property, I said evenly. Lens pointed at mirrored sunglasses. Permitted structure. I suggest you put it back. The leader, probably the same voice behind orders from the board, muttered something about just following instructions and jerked his chin toward the skiff tied to my dock. One by one, they gathered their tools and retreated, the fog swallowing their outlines until only the motor's low chug marked their departure. I stood there a moment, the marinade recipe visible through the kitchen window behind me, paper curling at the edge from the kettle's steam. My phone buzzed again this time, with Ivy's name. The Conservation Fund withdrawals are bigger than we thought. By midweek, the sidewalk outside the HOA office looked like a parade route after the floats had passed confetti of copier paper underfoot, cardboard lids tilted on stacks of boxes, deputies stepping carefully so nothing spilled. A state resource investigator signed chain of custody forms on a cruiser hood, while two board members watched through the glass, their reflections ghosting in the window like they were already somewhere else. Word outran the sirens. By evening, the town hall filled faster than any potluck I'd ever seen. Wood paneling Idaho flag in the corner, the thermostat set to disagreement. Folding chairs squeaked as neighbors squeezed in phones, lifted whispers knitting the room together. I took the front table with my binder. Ivy set a small projector on a stack of hymnals the church had lent the hall, tested the focus until the wall stopped breathing. Cyrus sat second row. The permit, in its cracked frame, sealed inside a clear protective case like an artifact rescued from a river. "Let's keep this orderly," the interim moderator said, which is the sort of thing you say when everyone already knows it won't be. I plugged my laptop in. The projector cast a rectangle of pale light dust motes drifting like slow snow. First I said, and clicked. The dock camera footage rolled three men in gray polos prying at my deck, the timestamp steady in the corner. The sound, muted but still metallic, made people flinch. Someone said, "That's his place," like the picture might deny it if left unnamed. Click. A still of my private property sign coming down bolts gleaming in a worker's palm. A few gasps, a low "hey" from the back. Ivy took over without a flourish. Side-by-side scans filled the wall, left the original permit embossing catching the projector's flare. Right, the altered version signature field blank issuance date wrong by 2 years. She'd boxed the differences in thin red lines, and in a corner a screenshot of the metadata with the HOA office's workstation ID. "This is not a clerical error," she said, voice steady and a shade quieter than the room. "This is alteration." Cyrus stood then as carefully as if the case carried more than paper. He held up the cracked frame so the front rows could see the spidering glass the way the fracture nicked the printed date. "This frame fell when the compliance crew entered," he said. "We preserved it in this condition. The permit itself has not been altered." He passed the case to the investigator, who slid it into a padded bag with a practiced calm that made me feel for the first time in days like gravity still worked. Ivy's next slide looked unremarkable until you followed the column's date vendor memo amount. The same vendor repeating every quarter, the same memo consulting, the same neat $800 marching down the page. She didn't editorialize. She just enlarged a line until it filled the wall and let the number hang there like a bell note. "These are payments from the Lake Conservation Fund," she said, "a public nonprofit managed by the HOA." The murmurs lost their hushed manners and turned into voices, questions with edges, statements without question marks. A man who'd spoken at every holiday lighting ceremony stood face flushed. "Marlene," he said, turning halfway between the board table and the crowd, "I defended you last month. I told folks you were cleaning up messes. If this is true, if any of this is true, you need to resign. Tonight." Marlene didn't stand. Her fingers knitted and unknitted the hem of a blazer that had probably never met dust. "Context matters," she said. "You're seeing snapshots. We'll provide the full picture." The two board members leaned into her words like windbreaks. A woman in the third row. Helen, who lives 2 doors down, raised her phone the screen a white mirror. "The full picture is on the wall," she said. Laughter came hard and short, the kind that only arrives when the last thread lets go. The moderator cleared his throat into the mic, a sound like tearing paper. "Order," he said, and the room shuffled toward it. He glanced at a folded note handed up from a deputy, then back at us. "The county has taken temporary control of the HOA's financial records pending review," he read. "Effective immediately, all HOA accounts are frozen until the investigation concludes." Silence did a strange thing. Then it didn't land so much as rise like mist lifting off the lake when the sun finally finds it. I looked at Ivy. She exhaled in that slow way she learned in yoga and law school patience built breath by breath. Cyrus's jaw unclenched by a fraction. In the second row someone started to clap and then thought better of it. The projector hummed. The last slide still glowed the embossed seal on the left, the blank field on the right, the crack in my old frame echoing across the room in the form of 100 small decisions to look closer. The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, a blend that clung to the throat like a caution. Fluorescent lights hummed against the high ceiling. Every scrape of a chair seemed to travel farther than it should. I took my place at the plaintiff's table and set my binder down palms flat for a second to steady the pages and my breathing. Behind me, Ivy slid into a pew legal pad at the ready pen poised above the first line like a runner over starting blocks. Cyrus arrived through the side door with the deliberate gait of a man who still trusts steps more than speed. He carried a cardboard document tube tucked under one arm, the end capped in red. When he passed my shoulder, I caught the familiar clean scent of his aftershave and something else fresh paper warmed by hands. He tipped the tube toward me the way a woodsman might share a flask and then took the witness chair when the bailiff called his name. Marlene sat at the defense table in a suit a shade darker than her expression, head tilted toward her attorney. They whispered as if volume alone could bend facts. Her hands lay folded and motionless on the tabletop, a pose I recognized from HOA meetings where dissent was treated like bad weather, something to be waited out, then rewritten in the minutes. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then settled into that courtroom murmur that never quite disappears. The clerk swore Cyrus in. He raised his right hand with a steady palm and swore to tell the truth. The DA, a woman with a precise voice and a scuffed briefcase, approached the stand. "Mr. Alden, would you state your background for the record?" "Cyrus P. Alden," he said. "Retired investigator, Idaho Department of Lands. 28 years dealing with shoreline permits, timber contracts, and public resource compliance." "Do you recognize this document?" the DA asked, taking the tube, uncapping it, and sliding the rolled sheet into his hands. Cyrus unrolled the permit, carefully flattening the edges with 3 fingers, the way you might tame a map in wind. The crack in the lower corner of the old frame had left a faint crease in the paper, no more than a memory of glass, but the seal caught the courtroom light and threw it back in a subtle crescent. He angled the page for the judge to see. "I do," he said. "This is a dock permit issued to Malcolm Kersey in 2016. Embossed by the state of Idaho. Note the watermark in the border wave pattern offset at 30 degrees. The embossing lifts the paper fibers. If you run a finger lightly, you can feel the ridge. The signature is original ink, not a reproduction. The issuance number corresponds to a sequence assigned that year." The DA held up a glossy print of a second image. "And this A later scanned missing the signature with a falsified issuance date. The embossing here is a pixelated circle. No fiber deformation. It is not the same document, nor a faithful copy. Your Honor, the DA said the state moves to admit the original permit into evidence with accompanying certification from the county archive and system logs showing that the altered scan originated from a workstation registered to the HOA office." The defense objected something about foundation, but the judge reviewed the documents, tapped a finger once against the seal, and nodded. Admitted. I felt the smallest drop in my shoulders a notch released. The DA called the treasurer next Marcus Ellery, thin as a reed glasses slipping on the bridge of his nose. He took the oath without meeting anyone's eyes. "Mr. Ellery," the DA began, "did the board know Mr. Kersey's dock permit was valid at the time the community access sign was planted and the deck removal attempted?" A long swallow moved down his throat. "Yes." "And did the board authorize payments from the Lake Conservation Fund to a vendor called Wellington Resource Partners, totaling $29,400 over 3 quarters labeled consulting? Yes. What services were rendered in exchange for those payments?" His mouth opened-closed. "None that I can document." The whisper under the ceiling sharpened into the sound of people remembering they had voices. The judge's gavel brought quiet back in a single wooden heartbeat. "Your Honor," The DA said, "The state asks that charges for forgery of a public document and misappropriation of nonprofit funds proceed to trial." "So," ordered the judge said, "no lecture, no spectacle, just the words set down clean like fence posts along a boundary line everyone could see." Marlene's attorney leaned in close, but whatever passed between them didn't move her face. When the bailiff touched her elbow, she stood as if she were rising from a pew. Eyes fixed not on me, not on the DA, but on the middle distance only some people can inhabit when the present refuses to bend. As the deputies guided her toward the side door, the lemon polish in the room seemed to grow sharper astringent enough to sting. We filed out into the corridor where sunlight fell into long flags across the tile. Ivy's hand found my sleeve and squeezed once quick and proud, then let go to jot a note she didn't want to forget. Cyrus capped the document tube and handed it back to me. "Keep it close," he said. "Paper wins wars without firing a shot." Near the courthouse steps, a reporter held a mic with the station's logo aimed like a curious bird. "Mr. Kersey," she called, "what will you do with the deck?" Now I looked past her to the sliver of sky between the buildings, the same blue that sits over the lake on a clean day. My mouth remembered a smile before I had to think about making one. A month later, the workshop smelled like sap and sawdust and the faint citrus of the wax I use when I want wood to keep speaking after I'm done with it. I had the miter box clamped and a length of local pine pressed against the fence. 4 45-degree cuts, and the frame pieces fit together like a picture you didn't know you'd been solving. The old cracked glass leaned against the wall where I'd left it, a jag of sunlight snagging in the spidered corner. I didn't toss it. You keep a few scars around to remember where the skin used to be thin. I sanded the edges until my fingers knew them better than my eyes did, slivers gone, corners, softened grain rising and settling under the paper. When the joints drank the glue, I pinned them with brads barely longer than a thumbnail and wiped the squeeze out with a damp rag. The permit lay on the bench wrapped in tissue, the gold seal patient as a coin under snow. I set a new pane of glass into the rabbit, checked for dust twice, then lowered the paper in and eased the backer board home. 4 turn buttons clicked into place. The frame in my hands felt warmer than the air. Outside, late autumn was doing its last good impression of summer gold on the deck, cold, hiding in the shadows. Ivy had set 3 mugs on the rail, steam rising slow in the calm. Cyrus leaned against a post with that easy balance he has a man shaped by years of uneven ground. Across the water, neighbors' laughter stitched small bright threads between docks. Every few beats a reel clicked, and a voice said something like hope. I carried the frame out. The light hit the seal and made it blink. We cleared the small table by the stairs. Cyrus scooped up my tape measure and set it aside, and I laid the frame down with the care that would have made a museum guard nod. "Well now," he said, tilting his head, "that might be too nice to hang where anyone can reach it. We'll have to charge admission." Ivy laughed and pulled a level from her tote. "We're going to hang it, and we're going to hang it straight." She tapped the wall beside the door where the old one had lived. "Studs right here. You always pick good spots, Dad." I marked the holes, drilled set anchors, and drove the screws until the threads bit and held. When I lifted the frame into its new hooks, the deck seemed to inhale the way a room changes when you put a painting back and it remembers what it was built around. The embossing caught a ribbon of sun and sent it across the glass in a thin traveling line. Jonah Pelham came up the steps with a plate under foil and a grin that announced he'd brought exactly what you wanted. "Smoked trout," he said. "Had to break in the new alder chips. Figured it was time the lake gave back in a way we all agreed on. We ate standing the way people do when chairs feel like a delay. The fish was silky and bright with lemon, the smoke clean, not bossy." Jonah pointed with his elbow toward the far cove. "They pulled the last of those community access signs this morning. County truck proper paperwork, no speeches, just gone." Ivy wiped her hands on a napkin and opened her notebook anyway. "Old habits. The new Conservation Council met last night," she said. "Budget posted online, line items explained. Quarterly audits by a third-party public Q&A before any shoreline changes, and a hard rule no private permits touched without owner consent and county review." Cyrus nodded. Funny how sunlight fixes things better than heat. On the neighboring dock, a boy with a life vest too big for his ribs set his feet and lifted a rod tip like a prayer. The float went under in a clean gulp. He yelped, the reel sang, and a tiny silver body flashed above the water, skipping once before he swung it onto the boards. For a heartbeat, the lake itself seemed to applaud ripples clapping lightly against pilings. Someone whooped. Someone else said, "Attaboy." The kid grinned so hard he looked like he'd borrowed a mouth one size up from his face. I stepped back to the frame. A fine line of sawdust still dusted the bottom rail. I brushed it away with the back of a knuckle. The glass showed me the lake behind my shoulder turned faint and friendly by reflection. I thought of the morning the old pane split and the small mean sound it made. I thought of file boxes in the back of cruisers, of red numbers that told lies by repeating themselves, of Brent's text and the way friendship sometimes drifts to a mooring you can't reach. I thought of Ivy's voice when she reads a statute clear enough to put a spine back into a sentence, and of Cyrus's hands holding paper the way he holds tools, like both can build something if you use them right. Neighbors cast and reeled. Jonah set another slice of fish on my plate. Ivy leaned her shoulder into mine. The permit hung where it had always wanted to be, only now it knew what it had survived. The old cracked glass inside the shop caught the last light and went dark without complaint. I looked from the frame to the water, the surface so calm it felt like a kept promise. Some things worth keeping aren't just property. They're peace, the kind you hang level and check now and then, the kind that holds even when the wind comes up. The new pine frame caught the last slant of afternoon sun, its glass clear and whole, the gold seal inside steady as a heartbeat. From the deck I could hear the lake breathing against the pilings, each ripple gentler than the one before. Justice, I've learned, isn't always a gavel. It's the quiet return of what was rightfully yours and the grace to share it. Sometimes the cracks we mend end up stronger than the wood around them. If you've ever had to reclaim something that mattered, be it land trust or your own voice, I'd love to hear how it changed you. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise?